Hello there. Today I'm going to tell you about Karl Marx. So Karl Marx, a German philosopher, historian, sociologist, economic theory, social revolutionary, you name it, and above all, the founder of Marxism, was also a passionate chess player. So passionate that chess could have costed him his family life and maybe even his career. It's a bit far-fetched, but maybe even his career. I'm saying this because Marx was known to be very obsessive and very dedicated chap that sacrificed his health, his family, and even his life to his writing. The story is told by Marx's chess nemesis, Wilhelm Liebknecht, who played Marx in London in 1850s. Chess was very fashionable among intellectuals of Marx's generation, so it is not that peculiar that both Liebknecht and Marx are into chess. Liebknecht is a German, Marx is a German, they're in London in 1850s. So what happened? The spectre was haunting Europe, which resulted in rebellions and revolutions of 1848 and 1849, the so-called Springtime of the Nations. The Holy Alliance of Russia, Prussia, and Austria were successful at quenching revolutions all over the continent, and the conservative values prevailed yet again. The post-revolutionary Europe was not a friendly place for social revolutionaries. Many of them found exile in liberal London in late 1840s, 1850s. Karl Marx stayed there for the rest of his life. Many lived in the old Campton Street at the so-called German hotel. It was not a real hotel, it was a model lodging, which was the housing for the working class in London that was mass built in the times. Marx was living in poverty. He was so poor at the times that he was evacuated from his previous place. The household was very large, it consisted of 6 children, and unfortunately only 4 of them survived until adulthood. Wilhelm Liebknecht was also a socialist revolutionary, 8 years junior to Marx, from Germany. He made his mark by being one of the founding members of SPD, the German Socialist Democratic Party, which is until today one of the strongest parties in Germany. If Liebknecht's surname sounds familiar, it could also be due to his famous son Karl that died in the 1919 unsuccessful Berlin Communist Rebellion. One could imagine that at this so-called German hotel, when many revolutionaries lived, most of them without a full-time occupation, that indulging into chess would be one of the favorite pastime activities. Marx developed a new line. So in those times, the chess books were not as common as today. Even among not so strong players, it was probably very common to develop so-called new lines. And Marx was beating everybody. Until the end of the day, where Wilhelm Liebknecht, who was a superior player to Marx, started having an upper hand of him again. Based on Wilhelm Liebknecht's description, Karl Marx was upset when he was losing games, so he was a very bad loser, and he demanded revenge immediately. And since Wilhelm was beating him towards the end of the day, and it was already getting very late, Karl Marx demanded that they continue the next day at Karl's place. And the next morning, Wilhelm arrived at the agreed time. He was not as warmly welcomed as usual in the Marx's household. Marx immediately fetched the chessboards, and the two friends started playing chess. Karl Marx was well prepared again. He studied Liebknecht's defense during the night, and he came up with new improvements and started winning again. But again, Wilhelm was a better player, and he got used to Marx's defense, and he developed a more superior move yet again. Marx was demanding that they don't stop playing. So despite Marx's plea to play more, Helena Demuth, called Lenhen the housemaid, categorically terminated their chess games by saying, "Now you stop." Rivalry was postponed again to another morning. But Jenny Marx, the wife of Karl, had a reserve tempo down her sleeve. Next morning, somebody knocked at Wilhelm's door. To his surprise, it was not Karl demanding that they play chess, but it was Karl Marx's housemaid Lenhen, who politely asked him not to play chess with Karl anymore. Karl was very upset and that he was venting on his wife last night, and Jenny Marx could not bear this behavior anymore. And that is how comrades stopped playing chess in London. And if it were not for decisive measures of Jenny Marx and the determined Lenin, who knows, maybe we would know of Karl Marx not as a writer of Das Kapital, but as of a chess player. And we know something of Karl Marx as a chess player. So there is a record of one game in 1861 against someone called Meyer. From this game you can really see that Karl Marx was a very explosive player. According to Wilhelm Liebknecht's word, he was compensating his lack of science by impetuousness of attack, aggressiveness and surprise, and zeal, of course. This is the only recorded game that Marx played against someone called Meyer, playing in black. They played in Germany in 1867, and it is e4, e5, f4, the King's Gambit. On the board, declining King's Gambit was considered dishonest in 19th century. You have Karl Marx, the historical materialist, sacrificing material very early on, and then Meyer continues with the bishop. So Meyer doesn't take the opportunity to check him with the queen, but instead he is protecting the pawn with the Anderson defense. Marx plays the knight, and after the knight is attacked at g4, Marx doesn't care and he just castles. So he goes full Mutio here. Obviously Marx takes with the queen, applying further pressure on the f square, and Meyer, the only good move, queen to f6. Marx sacrificing is another proletarian in this position, attacking with the pawn at e5. Meyer takes with the queen. Marx opens the file for his bishop, playing the pawn to d3, protecting f4 pawn with a bishop to h6, knight to c3, knight to e7, bishop d2, knight c7, and rook to e1, attacking the queen and pinning the knight to the king. Meyer removes the queen. Marx applies further pressure on the knight that is at e7 with knight to d5, king to d8, otherwise it would be very dangerous for him. And here Marx plays bishop c3, rook to g8, bishop to f6, applying further pressure to the knight, bishop for the rescue to g5 for Meyer. Bishop takes bishop, queen takes bishop, knight takes pawn at f4, and here we have the knight to e5. Queen goes to the e file, and knight is protected by the pawn, and the bishop is free to go. Marx chases away the queen with h4, and here's the first mistake that Meyer made. So all the moves before were according to the theory of the times. Playing the queen to g4, it was much better to keep the queen around g6 or g7. Marx exploits this mistake by attacking the rook and taking the pawn with bishop to f7. Rook goes to f8, bishop returns to h5, again chasing away the queen, and now finally queen goes to g7. d4, knight runs away to c6, c3, Marx solidifying the center. It's an inexplicable move for Meyer. The moment when he had tempo, he could start a counterattack with knight to f5 or lift his rook to f5 square. Instead he plays a5, probably trying to launch the attack on the queen side of Marx, completely ignoring the dire situation at the king side. Marx exploits this by checking with the knight to e6. The knight is taken since he was forking the king and the rook. Marx takes rook, queen takes rook, and Marx's queen to e6. Tries to save the situation with a6, but there is really nothing much that Meyer can do at this position because rook comes to f1, g7, g4, threatening checkmate, knight to b8, protecting from checkmate, and it was after move 28 that Meyer resigned the game because there was nothing else that he could do. He could exchange his queen for the rook and still be under very big pressure of checkmate, and with material down there is really nothing to do, and it was a fair thing for him to resign at this situation. From this game we could see that Marx was very aggressive and explosive player, playing the King's Gambit, but the game was played before Steinitz reform, so it was still the romantic chess where it was a lot about gambits and sacrifices. And what about you? Did you ever play consecutively as comrades in London in 1850s? If it happened to you, please share your experiences in comments. And that's the end of our video. I hope you enjoyed the story. I wish you a nice day, a nice rest of the week, and hope to see you again. Bye bye. Karl Marx.